Hey guys, I have some thoughts. I will not be silenced. As I was saying before I was rudely interrupted, I got some thoughts about my boy Bran Stark of Winterfell, a Grandmaster Hermit, omniscient druid, wild boy. I don't think it makes sense for him to be so, what's the word? So emotionless and aloof. So of course Bran turns into the Three-Eyed Raven, and it's never explicitly said why he becomes this kind of like emotionless shell of his former self, but I mean it's heavily implied because he's seen so much shit that he doesn't need emotions anymore. He's experienced so much happiness, so much sadness, I guess, and stuff like that, that he maxed out on those stats points and they just nullified or something. I don't think it makes sense. I've never had the powers of the Three-Eyed Raven, but I've had access to the internet, so I think I'm qualified, or people, humankind in general, is more qualified than ever because of the internet to be like, hey, this doesn't just automatically happens to people who attain the powers of the Three-Eyed Raven. And I'm gonna make a case specifically for Bran because I strongly disagree with Bran's case, and then more in general, you know, I'm open to discussion more in general, if it can happen beyond the like confinements of Game of Thrones, the setting that it's set up, and how Bran's powers particularly work. But yeah, let's jump into Bran's thingamajigger. So like I just said, the implicit reason, right, is because he's experienced so many things that like once you experience everything, you reach this like enlightenment where you don't need feelings or whatever. You don't feel for anything anymore because you've seen it all already. Yeah, but I don't know. I don't know if this is the thing that they're going for from all angles, like all emotions. I like my agreement depends on what kind of emotion you're talking about. Like if you said that if you experience so much happiness, the most happiest incidents in the world, you won't be able to feel happiness anymore, I'd probably disagree with that. Other emotions, I think you might be able to become desensitized to, at least more so than happiness. Like if you see someone die, and then you see another person die in the same way, at first you think it's, oh, disgusting, I'm gonna throw up and shit, and I feel hella bad. Eventually you might be like, oh, I've seen it before. I think as humans in a modern age, we can kind of sympathize with that because we are desensitized to a lot of things in the current day and age, especially with the internet. We watch a lot of TV and movies, so murder and stuff on screen seems pretty normal. So that's like one aspect that I can kind of see. But if you're talking about other things like happiness and not really, I don't know, just feeling for other people, it's weird because we kind of can do that too, even beyond the movies, where of course that's fiction, so you're like, oh, you don't really need to feel for them because they're all characters, they're fake or whatever, they're not really dying. It's not like you're watching every Hollywood movie you've watched is a snuff film. Bran's actually in the moment and watching it happen, experiencing it, hearing it, maybe smelling it. I don't know how his powers work. But we have that too in a kind of shortened sense, not through movies, but like say through the internet, through knowing history books, Wikipedia and shit like that. We can theoretically read a bunch of shit about real life that connects to our lives. Like I can look up where my father's from, the history of his country as a third world country, and see how all this shit happened that led to wars and terrible tragic stuff, but I won't become desensitized to it. And so you could argue that, well, Bran's powers represent infinity. Like you just keep going through that shit, and you become desensitized to it. And as people just using the internet, you don't really go that far into it. You only have what is recorded in history, and that in proportion isn't the entirety of the human race. But I don't know, that's like something that I would like to set up as a prompt. Like, do you think a species or like a human race in mankind, the whole history of mankind, is that history enough to be so much that you would become desensitized to emotions? Or would you theoretically need to be like completely infinite, like seeing other planets' histories and aliens and shit like that? Or is humans' history enough to make you go emotionless? But something more relevant here is Bran's case. I'm definitely going to argue against Bran's case because of certain plot points. In the most recent season, you see how he hasn't really seen that much, because at the end of season 7, when they do that huge cliffhanger with Jon's ancestry, Sam pretty much points out that Bran didn't even watch enough of the history to know about Jon's parenthood. Sam had to point him out to it and tell him where to look in history. I forget what he actually pointed out, if it was like a location or just like the name of the incident, and he found it hella easily. But if he couldn't even go to that himself, if he didn't know that already, then that just proves that he hasn't seen that much. He hasn't been tripping out that much with human history, because that's only one generational divide. His aunt Lyanna, that's one tier up the family tree, and if he hadn't even learned everything about that one step, then there's no way that he's learned so much about the world that he's become emotionless. So Bran's just pretending, man. He actually feels a lot, I bet. And I don't really see how you can argue that for whatever reason he just didn't go to that event, Lyanna and Rhaegar's wedding, because it's so relevant. As a Wikipedia person who, you know, goes down the Wikipedia hole so many times, like you're reading this article and then you click on this relevant link and you keep going. There's like a rabbit hole and you go everywhere. There's so many possible Wikipedia articles that he could have been already on that would have led him to that. Like, why would he not be watching a bunch of shit about how the war started and stuff like that? So many things that he could have been watching relevant to the war would have led him to Rhaegar and Lyanna's wedding. So that's why I think that Bran's case in particular doesn't make sense. He shouldn't be that way. As for the more general case of like if somebody theoretically had those powers, would they automatically become emotionless if they watched enough of human history or whatever and experienced so many things that nothing in their life mattered anymore? So they're just like, no, you stole, you gave him, that's your knife, you killed him. Yeah, I'm gonna go chill now. You know, I still think it depends on the person. Going back to Bran's case, you could argue that he didn't really have that much of a developed constitution, I guess. Am I using the right word? Constitution? Because he was still like a preteen, basically. So like maybe if he was an adult and then he got the powers, he would have been like, oh, I'm already an adult who's grown and stuff, so when I watch all this stuff I have a frame of reference or something to go back on, to be like, to not get absorbed into it and lose my own identity or something. Another kind of point is that the three-eyed raven before him, I don't know if it was unintentional, but the actor playing him, just the way that he spoke and stuff, he definitely exhibited more actual genuine emotion than Bran does. So I do think that he still had like a degree of, you know, personality to him, unlike Bran, and he had been three-eyed raven for like way longer than Bran. He was way better at it. He probably watched way more shit. So yeah, I don't know, maybe. So yeah, that's just some thoughts I wanted to get out about Game of Thrones. I'd be interested in knowing what you guys think. Oh shit. Bran just warged into my Discord to give me some hate mail. I'd be interested in knowing what you guys think relative to just Bran's case, if it's justified or it makes sense from the Game of Thrones' storytelling, and in general that kind of like argument, the conceptual argument of like, if I had like omniscience, I guess it's not really omniscience, but if I had like the power to see everything going on and everything that has happened before, would anybody automatically just lose their identity to it, or would they not? Like, if you see murders happening over and over, if you see a bunch of people getting tortured unlimitedly, would you just turn stale from that?